This is the support film for the Nazi Economic Policy Booklet, Booklet 6 of the History GCSE course at Plymstock School. As you can see from the booklets listed at the top of the page, this is Booklet 6 of 8, and the Nazi Economic Policy Booklet will be assessed with Booklets 4 and 5 in the third internal exam that students do on life in Hitler's Germany. History will judge us accordingly to whether we have succeeded in providing work. Hitler, like all politicians, has his eye on this fundamental first rule, that all politicians seek to create terms favourable to their re-election. Hitler promised the German people work, bread and freedom. It is the unemployed that voted for Hitler. He therefore has to provide them with jobs, otherwise he is going to have as short a chancellorship as the other nameless chancellors that come before him. The first job of any politician is to create conditions favourable to their re-election. When Hitler came to power in 1933, 6 million Germans were out of work. His most urgent job was to find them work, for during the election campaign he had promised the voters work, bread and freedom if he ever became leader. The Nazi handling of the economy was therefore the foundation for all subsequent Nazi plans. Without a success, without a triumph in the area of economics, the Nazis would not have been able to do everything else that they subsequently did in attempting to establish the totalitarian state, which is the theme of booklets 4, 5, 6, 7 and 8. Now, as students work their way through this booklet, they should be able to be working towards answering these questions. Without a Wall Street crash, Hitler would have never become Chancellor. Why did Hitler identify jobs in the economy as his main priority? And finally, did the Nazis achieve an economic miracle? Now, as we go through this booklet, I would like to remind students and parents alike that the knowledge contained in this booklet is the core knowledge. And students would do well to note the other anecdotal information that I explain as I go through this, as they should have already done working through this booklet, and be aware that it again is only the core of the knowledge. Now, everything in this booklet is backed up by our webpage, which can be found go through www.historynetwork.co.uk. On the shared area, we have resources for the iPod, we have DVD resources, and additional reading materials can also be found on the shared area. I reiterate again, this is core knowledge. If your student, son or daughter is aiming for grades B, A and A star, this is only the foundation of what they need to know. Okay, lesson 1, very basic introduction to the terminology, the lexicon of economics. First and foremost, what do we understand by economics? Followed up with the 3 aims that the Nazis had. 3 obstacles in their way, and all of this information can be found by using the PowerPoint presentation that is on the shared area for lesson 1. Once students have worked their way through this lesson, I need to guide them to go back again to determine whether their understanding is negligible, moving towards, or full understanding of each of the key questions. Then students need to work through the true or false statements, after they completed the activity that we do in class, which will test their understanding. Reiterated by matching the key words to their definitions. Lesson 2 then, the Nazi economy, the new plan and the 4-year plan. From 1933 up to and including the outbreak of the war, the Nazis employed 2 different plans, controlled by 2 different individuals to direct their economic planning. Okay. Now, students will have watched a presentation which will enable them to fill out the key gaps in the text here and identify how the policies of the 2 plans, the new plan and the 4-year plan, managed to tick all these boxes that Germany needed to do. Now then, the first plan when Hitler comes to power is the new plan. That's controlled by a man called Dr. Hjalmar Schacht. Now, interestingly enough, Hitler, for all his ego, understood that economics was one thing he didn't understand, and he delegated economics down to Schott. And Schott's job was to provide the German people with a sense of economic recovery. Now, this in turn leads to this sense that there was indeed an economic miracle. The German economy, since we've studied this course, has been one roller coaster of ups and downs. We have economic crash at the end of World War I. We have economic crisis compounded by the Treaty of Versailles and reparations. We know that the reparations led to the Germans defaulting in 1923, which leads to the hyperinflation of 1923 and the year of crisis, which in turn leads to Hitler's first attempt to seize power at the Munich Putsch. So economics, managing the economy and bringing prosperity to the German people is absolutely essential. As the students will have been told, people vote principally with their wallets. If Hitler can deliver on the economy, he's going to have the goodwill by which he can go forward with other policies that he might be wanting to carry out. So once again, we come back to this notion that it is the economy that is the foundation of everything that comes afterwards. Now, because Germany had experienced such economic hardships during the 1920s, it was very, very important that the Nazis didn't create a crisis in the economy like the Weimar Republic did by printing money, because as students will know, it creates hyperinflation. So Schott introduces something called the Methow Bill, a very complicated economic tool, which is essentially an IOU, which the government pay industry to rebuild the economy, to rebuild the armed forces, to rebuild public works projects like the Autobahn, schools and hospitals, which in turn re-employ people who earn a wage and who pay tax, which then the government uses to reinvest again. But what made it a clever economic tool is that interest was paid on the IOU, so it was economically viable for companies to accept payments in terms of the Methow Bill. Now, what is very clear is, as we work through this course, is that the German economy is rebuilt on credit. It's rebuilt on borrowed money. And as we know since 2007, money that is borrowed by governments obviously has to be repaid. What we do know now with hindsight, but of course Germans didn't know, nor did Schott know back in the 1930s, is the Nazis never had any intention of repaying back the debts that they had taken out. Now, the new plan had a basic remit that it was to provide the German people with this sense of prosperity for which they would be grateful to the Nazis. They were to have butter and guns. This belief that the German economy could grow and provide for the people's well-being and at the same time rebuild the German war machine. Now, for all of Schott's genius, he very quickly realizes that the German economy will struggle to provide both butter and guns. And in due course, this is what leads to his falling out with Adolf Hitler. You can't have both butter and guns. You can't square that circle. In 1937, Hitler privately announces to his leading officers and generals and party leadership that the intention for Germany to fight a war to overturn the Treaty of Versailles and reclaim the lost territories. This is something that Schott believes the German economy is not capable of fighting, and ends up with Schott's dismissal in 1937. Hermann Göring, the deputy of the Nazi Party, is then given the task of running the German economy. Same aims, same ambitions. Attempt to balance trade, attempt to create self-sufficiency, the posh word being autarky. Continue to reduce unemployment, improve wages, prevent inflation, help rearmament, create jobs, and generally improve the economy. This is the focus too of the 4-year plan, but specifically Germany is now aiming for a war. Göring is no expert on economics, but he is trustworthy in a way that Schott proved that he was not. Those are the two key plans that Hitler delegates for the rebuilding of the German economy. Okay, then students need to work through the key questions that we have listed here. Mr. Wilcox, in designing the booklet, introduces the idea of mnemonics to help students remember the new plan and the 4-year plan. It might be something that the students find that work, it might be something that students want to dismiss. Who were the key leaders? So key factual recall. In what ways did the Nazis try to reduce unemployment? Well, we are aware of public building works. We are aware of labour organisations which recruited unemployed school leavers to work for the state. We're aware of big public works projects. This idea of Keynesian economics. The government spend money. In this case, money that Germany didn't have. They spent money through IOUs, the Methow Bills, to build things that would employ people, that would pay them a minimum wage, that would generate tax, which would go back to the government, which could be respent again. Fourthly, explain why the Nazis wanted to make Germany self-sufficient. What was this policy known as? How did they intend to make Germany self-sufficient? Well, a couple of points here that the students will have been taught about. Germany had been blockaded during World War I by the Royal Navy. Germany was essentially starved into submission by the end of World War I. It's the first activity that the students actually do when they study the German course. They understand that Germany was starving, therefore Germany needed to be self-sufficient to prevent itself being beaten by the Royal Navy again. This policy is known as Autarky, and they intended to make Germany self-sufficient by using the policies that are highlighted on the grid activity that we did earlier on. This idea that Germany will produce more of its own stuff. Germany will have trade arrangements, not involving cash, but involving swapping of goods, a form of bartering. And interestingly, those countries are all to the east of Germany, not to the west, and therefore less likely to be interrupted by the Royal Navy. And then fifthly, students are to summarise the key policies of the new plan and the 4-year plan. Essentially, improve the economy, create this notion of an economic miracle, of prosperity, which will bring the German people to the side of the Nazis. And 6, the key aim of the 4-year plan was to channel and focus Germany's economic power into rebuilding a military machine capable of fighting a war that this time Germany intends to win. Lesson 3 then. Were the workers better off under the Nazis? Now, in the course so far, students have looked at different groups, different aspects, demographics of German society. Each of those groups needed to be controlled if Hitler was to establish his totalitarian state. So we have the children controlled by curriculum in school, the children controlled outside of school, roles defined for women who were more than half of the population. Well, the workers are mainly now the men, because women were kicked out of their jobs and sent back to their homes. The men need to be controlled in the workplace. How does Hitler attempt to do this? Well, Hitler sets up these organisations. The German Labour Front was the Nazi organisation that replaced the trade unions. Unions are powerful in the sense that they are a power separate from the government. That wouldn't be tolerated in Germany's and Hitler's totalitarian state. So the German Labour Front, the DAF, the Deutsche Arbeiter Frei, was set up to replace the trade unions, with Hitler saying, I will look after you, the workers. Beauty of Labour was an organisation set up within the DAF, the German Labour Front, to improve the working conditions of the workers, therefore appealing to the workers. And Strength Through Joy, the organisation that was set up to encourage and reward productive workers, loyal party members, people who assisted the Nazis in establishing their totalitarian state. As students go through this activity, those 3 organisations and what they did are the key facts that students need to remember. The students are then asked to work through a series of sources to interpret the sources. Now, whenever students work through sources, we encourage them to use the DIE technique. Describe the source, interpret the source, evaluate the source. Now, the description of the source should be apparent to the students simply looking at the source, but we also have the provenance here, the explanation. Now, this is the description. Interpret, summarise the source in your own words, And finally, evaluate. Use your interpretation to answer the question. So DIE is a skill that runs in parallel with the PEA, extended writing technique, that students have been taught since year 7. So students have 9 sources. They will be expected to read, describe, interpret in their own words, and subsequently evaluate. Now, as we go through this, have in the back of your mind in this activity this notion: did the Nazis achieve an economic miracle? Be aware of the usefulness of the sources that you're looking at. Are we talking about specific events? Are we talking about events that represent all of Germany? So when we read in sources 1, 2, and 3 that it was very harsh conditions in which the German people rebuilt or built the Autobahn for the first time, you have to ask yourself, are we looking at an economic miracle here? Are we looking at something that was an improvement but not a miracle? Are we looking at something that's the complete opposite? However, when we do look at the fact that people are working in Germany, don't lose track of where this fits into the economic history of Germany. These people, however harsh the conditions might be, are in fact working. Hitler promised work, bread and freedom. He didn't promise high-powered jobs, high wages and freedom. He promised work. So that's that wider context that my more able students will need to consider. Reading sources 4, 5, 6 and 9. What were the roles of strength through joy and the beauty of labour? What was one of the problems with Strength Through Joy's holiday scheme according to year 7? So attempting to quantify the success of the Strength Through Joy moment. And then pulling all of the knowledge together, working towards this idea of an economic miracle. How happy were indeed the workers in Nazi Germany under the control of the Nazis? And again, contextualize it. How happy were they? How bad had things been before 1933? Okay. Lesson 4. Students need to take a look at a series of statistics. Being fully aware that statistics can be manipulated with the notion that there are lies, there are damned lies, and there are statistics. There's a lot of colour and a lot of information in the statistics that the students will be looking at. Their job, once again, is to apply the calm and controlled describe, interpret, evaluate system for looking at the statistical information. Describe what the graph is. Please look again at the provenance, the information that comes with each of the pieces of information. Interpret it in their own words, briefly and concisely tell themselves what it says, and then use their interpretation to evaluate, to answer the question. This is a graph. It shows the difference between imports and exports, for example. Interpret it. It tells me that the economy was much bigger in 1929 before the Wall Street crash. It dips down and then slowly, ever so slowly, starts to rise under the Nazis. Using that information, did the Nazis achieve an economic miracle? In my opinion, no, they didn't, because the economy was bigger before 1929. The Nazis oversee a slight improvement in the economy, never reaching the heights of 1929. Now, as we go through this and look at each of the sources, again, we have to remember the key date of 1933. The Nazis only become responsible for the economy after 1933. Before 1933, it is the Weimar Republic. And as we look at all of these statistics, we will see that the German economy crashes after 1929 and starts to make a recovery in 1932. Which is interesting when we keep coming back to the question, did the Nazis achieve an economic miracle? It certainly improves under the Nazis, but as a general rule of thumb, the economy never reaches the heights that it had in the late 1920s before the Wall Street crash. The Nazis oversee an improvement, but they inherit an improvement because it looks like the economy was recovering before they came to power. Now that's information that the Nazis would never have allowed the German people in the 1930s to have actually had access to. The economy was recovering before the Nazis came to power. Their policies certainly helped it. But as we said right back at the start, the German economic miracle, if there is one, is funded through IOUs. It's funded through money that the German people never had, and money that the German government, the Nazis, have no intention of ever repaying. They are using short-term economic policies that any government could employ, but don't, because everything a government like the British government, as we're experiencing now, borrows, has to be repaid. The Nazis had no intention of repaying these debts. So students will be looking at all 10 sources and mapping onto the graph just how well they think the economy is doing well according to their interpretation. Now the y-axis along here is a gauge of how well the economy is doing. So I would say the very top represents a miracle. Down here I would suggest that basically that the economy doesn't improve one jot since the Nazis came to power. So sliding scale between the two, it is a matter of opinion. And as students are working their way through that graph, they also have the opportunity to transpose their information, not in a graph form, but in a written form to a Venn diagram. So it allows students, again, two different ways of recording information. Do you want to use a graph? Do you want to use a Venn diagram? Empowering the students to understand the methods that they think works best for them. Okay, the next section is on Nazi economy presentations, where students are responsible for delivering their own presentations and grading each other's work. Lesson 7, students are looking at examples of previous students' work to understand the process by how we write extended written answers. Now, as we work through this activity, the basic rule is the PEA model that students have been understanding and working with since year 7. Each paragraph should have a point, a theme. There should be evidence, one or even better, 2 pieces of evidence to substantiate their point. And then finally, the analysis, where students actually answer the question. Describe how the Nazis reduced unemployment in the years 1933 to 1939. Now, students will have the mark scheme, and as we go through this, students will be able to use that to make judgments about the work. The logic being, if they think something is good, they should be able to replicate a piece of writing in that style. If they don't rate the particular piece of work, then how on earth would they possibly write something like it themselves? So answer 1, the Nazis reduced unemployment. Unemployment was when people didn't have jobs. In 1929 there was the Wall Street crash in the USA. This was when the stock market crashed and lots of people in America lost their jobs. People say that when America sneezes, the rest of the world catches a cold. And this means that lots of people lost their jobs all over the world, including Germany. Now the key thing to understand is however well written this piece of work is that we've just read, we must not lose track of what the task is that's being asked of the students. When students have a question, it's good practice that they underline the key words that define the task that they have to do. Every exam question is a task. It's asking them to explicitly do something with the knowledge that they can recall. An undisciplined student will see the question, read what it's generally about, and off they trot on a story. This student here has read the question as being about the economy and unemployment, and off they go, writing from 1929 and its consequences. The question is about the Nazis from 1933 to 1939. It's well written, it's factually correct, but it doesn't answer the question. Therefore, it wouldn't score anything. The examiners assume that in 2 years of studying, students have understood and learnt about the course. The exam challenges students to remember and then apply their knowledge. The best way of doing that is for students to keep calm, plan their response, and work within the time limits and the mark scheme that they've been given. Example 2. Now this one's been structured. They've broken their work into paragraphs. Each paragraph should contain the elements P, E, A. And when one reads the analysis, which should be the last sentence or sentences of any paragraph that's been written, one should be able to get an idea of what the question is that the student is answering. Describe how the Nazis reduced unemployment in the years 1933 to 1939. Well, this is an attempted analysis. It's not particularly clear. It's missing that key word that even Year 7s are encouraged to make sure that they write, because. But down here on our second example, which is using conscription for our point, evidence down here, analysis here, it explains how conscription reduced unemployment. Much more clearly, P-E-A. Now that's our second example, and here we've got a third. They reduced unemployment by removing women. Evidence, professional women lost their jobs. This meant unemployment was reduced because unemployed men replaced these women, P-E-A. And we have a fourth reason. The student here has come up with 4 P-E-A reasons. Some explained better than others. Definitely the first one being the weakest example. We are missing a conclusion where an opinion would have been good, which is the most important reason in reducing unemployment, but a much, much better response. Answer 3, lacking the structure in terms of paragraphs of number 2, but nonetheless, if you read it, it breaks down into several distinct parts, which could be identified as P, E, and A. Our first reason, the Nazis reduced unemployment by introducing public work schemes. Point. Huge numbers of unemployed were put to building motorways or autobahns, but also hospitals and government buildings. Evidence. Many unemployed people were conscripted into the army and therefore now counted as unemployed. Analysis. The Nazis believed women should stay at home. Jews and women also removed from their jobs. So, a little bit hit or miss in terms of PEA. It is there in parts, but nowhere near as well structured as the second response. The Nazis reduced unemployment massively between 33 and 39. They got people to build motorways, which they called Autobahns in Germany. This meant lots of unemployed people suddenly had jobs. An aim of the Nazis was also to rearm. Many people were conscripted into the army. This meant that meant they had to join the army. Therefore, they were no longer employed. We have mentioning conscription and the public works projects. It's not as good as answer 3. It's nowhere near as good as answer 2. But it's an attempt at answering the question that was set out at the start, which answer 1 did not do. Finally, make sure students understand the key words and the key terminology. A timeline pulling together all the key dates that we've actually looked at, so we can look at economics as a theme. And finally, self-assessment. How well do you understand this booklet?